The extra minutes of discomfort, added to the total duration, didn't make the memory worse. The gentler ending made it better. Kahneman labeled the missing variable duration neglect. Your brain, when building a memory, applies almost no weight to how long something lasted. A 3-minute experience and a 30-minute experience with identical peaks and identical endings will produce nearly identical memories. You are not averaging your pain or your pleasure across time. You are sampling it at its sharpest moment and at its close. This is what Kahneman means when he distinguishes between the experiencing self and the remembering self. The experiencing self is the one living through each second in real time, the one that actually feels the discomfort on the table, the boredom in the middle of the trip, the small irritations inside what was otherwise a beautiful afternoon. The remembering self is the one that constructs the story afterward and files it away as the permanent version of what happened. These two selves have almost nothing in common, and they often want completely opposite things. The implications of this are stranger than they first appear. Think about how you plan vacations. Before you go, you want duration. More days feel like more value, more opportunity, more time to enjoy yourself. But research following up on Kahneman's work showed that the length of a trip accounts for almost nothing in how fondly people remember it afterward. What shapes the memory is the emotional peak, the most vivid, intense, positive, or negative moment of the whole trip, and the final day. Fly home after a delayed connection, a lost bag, and an argument at check-in, and those last 2 hours have the power to quietly rewrite 4 beautiful days. The peak doesn't change, but the ending lands hard on. Think about the best vacation you've ever taken. Now, think about a relationship that ended badly. Which one do you remember more completely, and which one do you remember more accurately? The answer to the first question is probably the relationship. The answer to the second is almost certainly neither. Your brain doesn't record experiences the way a camera records footage. Steady, continuous, every second weighted equally. It records 2 moments, and only 2, the emotional peak and the ending. Everything in between gets averaged, softened, compressed, or quietly dropped. Psychologist Daniel Kahneman spent decades studying this mechanism. He called it the peak-end rule, and it may be the single most important thing you don't know about how you form memories of your own life. The study that first revealed this ran in 1993, and it was genuinely uncomfortable to conduct. Kahneman worked alongside physician Donald Redelmeier to study patients undergoing colonoscopies at a Toronto hospital. At the time, the procedure was performed without sedation in many cases, making it consistently painful. Patients were given a dial and asked to report their level of discomfort in real time, every 60 seconds, for the duration of the entire procedure. After the procedure ended, each patient was asked a separate question: how unpleasant was the overall experience? 2 groups emerged from the data in a way nobody had predicted. Group A experienced shorter procedures. Group B had longer ones. But in the final moments of Group B's procedures, the discomfort level was slightly lower than at the ending moment of Group A's. Not because the pain was medically less intense, but because of how the physicians happened to handle the equipment in those concluding seconds. When patients later rated the overall experience for memory, Group B consistently described it as less unpleasant, despite the fact that their procedures had lasted longer and exposed them to the same peak pain. The memory is the version that stays. Relationships work the same way, which explains a pattern most people have noticed but rarely examined directly. Someone who spends 3 years in a mostly positive relationship that ends in a painful, drawn-out separation will often describe the whole relationship as fundamentally troubled when asked about it later. Not because the daily experience was bad, but because the ending was. Conversely, someone whose relationship was mediocre throughout but ended cleanly, with mutual respect and a sense of closure, may look back on it with more warmth than the actual day-to-day experience ever warranted. The ending becomes the filter through which everything before it gets reinterpreted. Psychologist Barbara Fredrickson at the University of North Carolina studied moment-to-moment emotional experience in real time and compared it to what people reported remembering afterward. The correlation between total emotional content across the duration and later memory was weak. The correlation between the emotional peak and the final moments versus later memory was strong. People don't remember the average of how they felt. They remember a story with a climax and a last scene. What makes this particularly uncomfortable is the cold water experiment Kahneman and Redelmeier later ran to test the rule under controlled conditions. Participants submerged their hands in cold water at 14 degrees Celsius for 60 seconds. Then, on a separate trial, they submerged their hands in 14-degree water for 60 seconds, followed by an additional 30 seconds where the water temperature was raised just slightly to 15 degrees. Still cold. Objectively more total discomfort across the longer trial. When participants were later asked which trial they would rather repeat, the majority chose the longer one. 60 seconds of cold, followed by 30 more seconds of slightly less cold, felt better in memory than 60 seconds of cold alone. The extra discomfort added to the total, but the slightly warmer ending softened the final impression, and the final impression was what the memory stored. Kahneman found this result deeply troubling, and he has said so publicly. A rational system of memory would prefer the shorter discomfort. The brain instead preferred the better story, even when the better story required more actual pain. The practical reach of this is wide. Concert organizers, theme park designers, and customer service architects have slowly learned to exploit the peak-end structure, often without knowing the academic name for what they're doing. The best concerts save something emotionally overwhelming for the final 3 minutes, not the middle. The best theme parks put the most intense ride at the peak of the visit and end with something lighter and satisfying that sends visitors toward the exit on a positive note. Redelmeier and Kahneman documented that colonoscopy patients who received an extended final phase, a few extra seconds with less discomfort at the close, even though it extended total procedure time, came back for future screenings at higher rates than those whose procedures ended at the peak of discomfort. You cannot change how this works, but you can change what you do with it. If you want someone to remember an experience well, invest most heavily in the peak and the ending. If you want to remember a difficult period more clearly and fairly, pay attention to the instinct to let a painful ending define everything that came before it, because that instinct is running automatically regardless of what the whole experience actually contained. Your remembering self is not an accurate historian. It is an editor, and it rewrites the story every single time based on 2 things and almost nothing else. Subscribe, because every single week we show you one more specific place where your brain is quietly making decisions you think you made entirely yourself.